our first session. I'd like to welcome you to our first breakout session of the 2012 Crime Prevention Conference. The conference that you've selected here is CPTED 20 years later in Mississauga. The presentation will last a total of 50 minutes. You'll be given 5 minutes for questions. After that, I'm going to be handing them a little gift. And then at that time, you can transition between this room and room 245, which is exactly right below us, one level. So you can mix and mingle between the different sessions at that time. As I mentioned, our first session is CPTED, so Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design in Mississauga 20 years later, and will be presented by Constable Tom McKay of the Peel Regional Police, Wayne Nishihama, who is Manager of Urban Design in the Planning and Building Department in the City of Mississauga, and Mr. Randy Jamieson, Senior Project Manager of the City of Mississauga. Please enjoy the session and hold all questions until after the 50 minutes. I'd like to invite the speakers up now.
Thank you, and I'm glad to see so many people out to see this presentation. It was kind of fun to put it together. The original idea is that we've been doing this a goodly number of years now, and I don't think it's boasting to say, I think we do it probably as good or better than pretty much any other place in terms of CPTED. And you know, I think maybe there's some lessons to be learned there and shared. You know, like any time things work out, it's not always good planning. That has an aspect to it, but it's also good fortune. And I think we were strong in both categories. We are going to talk today about designing Mississauga Canada's safest city. And I'll speak a little bit about that in the presentation. And we'll also be speaking about what you see here. If you like what you see, it's no accident. It's a very CPTED-friendly building, and it's actually a public washroom. There's other aspects to this building, but it's a public building, very innovative. Randy Jamieson will be speaking about this later in the presentation. CPTED really started, I guess in earnest, kind of on a formal basis, in about 1992, and it progressed at a pretty steady and even, I might say, rapid rate. I'm not going to go through a complete history by any stretch of the imagination, but just to give you a taste of what I'm talking about, by the end of that decade, we were hosting the International CPTED Association Conference. I believe it was the 7th conference. It had people from all over the world. I remember doing interviews for CFRB, CBC. We had people from South Africa, you know, some faraway places that you wouldn't really expect to be traveling to a conference here, to be sure, half a world away. And we attracted well over 200 delegates. It was a very successful conference. Just 2 years later, we held our first inaugural CPTED Ontario conference here at the City of Mississauga. Again, a very successful conference, more than 200 people. I think that speaks to the interest that's in the area. Of course, we had, again, people traveling from across Ontario and even beyond, but it was, again, something that was part of our history. We're proud of it. It was, like everything we do in this region and in the city in particular, a real partnership, and we'll talk about the partnership just as we get into it a little more. But again, really, I think got CPTED Ontario off to a very good start. And likewise, I think it puts some more wind in the sails of the considerable momentum that had been already happening now for almost a decade in the City of Mississauga. Some of you may be aware that Mississauga has been designated the safest city of its size in Canada for the past 12 years. And we like to think that CPTED played a role in it. We're not claiming, you know, that it was CPTED, that this occurred as a result of CPTED. There's lots of fine work in a lot of different areas by a lot of different people, again, partnerships, etc. But we feel that CPTED played a role. And if you finally look to the present, we've actually probably pushed CPTED down really to as far down to the grassroots level as you can get. And that's a really good thing, because that's actually fairly hard to do. And when I first started, it's coming up 21 years ago, you know, you almost was taken for certain that you would have to explain what CPTED is. Nowadays, you go into a community college, and I know we have Sheridan College students here. You go into, you just talk to a layperson, and chances are they know what CPTED is. And so that's really impressive. And in that regard, Brittany Wakefield, who introduced you, actually had a very significant role in this aspect of it. Brittany has been CPTED trained, both on basic and advanced courses. And she also coordinates the Neighborhood Watch for Safe City, Mississauga. And Brittany had the idea to incorporate a CPTED audit as part of the Neighborhood Watch. And she looks at it from a sort of a neighborhood level, but prior to the first Neighborhood Watch meeting, she's gone out, done an assessment, can speak knowledgeably about areas such as parks or things that, you know, could come up as part of that meeting. And already, you know, some steps have been taken to address, identify and address potential safety issues. So we go kind of back to the beginning, and you know, I never take for granted that everybody knows what exactly CPTED is, so I like to do a little bit of a primer. We'll also look at what role did CPTED play in the city's success, and how did it become part of the city's culture, because it is, in fact, I think a very fair statement to say it is part of the city's culture. So the what is CPTED is pretty easy. Most of you know it by the acronym, but it does stand for Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design. It's a bit of a clumsy name, but you know, we didn't invent the name, and you know, it's actually, if you think about it, it's like KFC, where's CPTED? You know, it's the same thing. We kind of go by the initials, right? So it's, it is what it is, and I think there's some name recognition there, and there is some value there. CPTED practitioners believe that the proper design and effective use of the built environment can lead to a reduction in the incidence and fear of crime and improve the quality of life. This is really a significant statement. Again, if you, this photograph that you see here, it's no accident. You know, we're just not going through a collage of photos that are meaningless and, you know, just look pretty. This is the St. Lawrence Starch property. And it has, of course, it's vetted through our planning department, and you'll hear from Wayne later on. But there is a lot of good CPTED illustrated in this development. And so it sort of illustrates very well what I'm going to be talking about. When you talk about proper design, it takes into account three main principles: natural surveillance, natural access control, and territorial reinforcement. We just often refer to it as territoriality. Now, natural surveillance is a design strategy that's directed at keeping intruders under observation. If you look at this particular photo, you can see there's lots of opportunity for that. These are townhomes. They are a number of windows, some on different facets of the building. There's bay windows, so it accounts for windows on the side here, as you see, and allows for views up and down the street, certainly across the street on the sidewalk. But then you have things that help, in fact, animate the street. These porches, for instance, if somebody was to enjoy their porch, they would, in fact, be lending eyes on the street. Now, there's more benefit than just that by sitting out on your porch. But again, it's another source of natural surveillance. And you can kind of think of yourself as the offender, and if you do, would you feel comfortable in this environment? And if you're thinking, no, not so much, it's because you know that there's a lot of windows, a lot of potential for eyes on. You're not sure where the eyes are coming from, where they're looking, you know, who's seeing you, etc. So this is a really good illustration of natural surveillance. Sources of surveillance, as I say, include not only the windows and the porches, but also the passerbys on the street. We hope to have, you know, a lot of people out with dogs, strollers, you name it, in vehicles, and that's another potential source. Next principle I want to illustrate is natural access control. It's a design strategy directed at decreasing crime opportunity. And it can include such things as soft and hard landscaping. And you can see, in fact, there's good illustrations of this. Now again, this is something that Wayne and his department would deal with as a matter of course, and it's not by accident that you see what you see here. There's a first illustration of some hard landscaping. It's this retaining wall, but it creates a nice transition from the public space, and it starts to really cover some semi-public area. And then I would say that this is a transition beginning to be into the semi-private space. But if you notice here, these buildings are not continuous. There's actually a break. You can see it right here. Sorry, I've gone one too far here. Right here, you can see that there is a break represented by here. This is a potential vulnerability in a conventionally designed home. If somebody got down the side of that home, they could probably access windows, and they might be able to access the rear yard. But look at how it plays out here. You have a defined path, which goes up a defined set of steps, leads directly to a further set of steps with the railings that channels you into the porch area, up in this semi-private area. Sorry, my fingers are a little clumsy these days. In the semi-private area, you notice that there's some soft landscaping that happens, and that again further defines the space. But for somebody to find themselves in this area here, they have to deviate off this path, likely walk over some soft landscaping. You know, all the time it's a red flag. What is that person doing? Why are they heading down there? If they were to be found down there, it would be subject to immediate challenge. What are you doing down here? You know, there's no reason why anybody would find themselves there. So again, these techniques start to sort of guide and influence movement and help decrease crime opportunity in the process. The last strategy is territorial reinforcement. Now, it's a design strategy that believes that physical design can create or extend a sphere of influence so that users develop a sense of proprietorship or ownership about the property. Now, in residential properties, yes, you know, it's kind of a given that the owner of the property will feel, you know, this is my home turf, I'm going to defend it. This is what happened to me when I defended my home turf, but that's another story. But, you know, it's a natural instinct, right? And so we know here from the design, we think in terms of defensible space. The concept that Newman came up with, Oscar Newman, back in the 70s, talked about even a little earlier than that. And we see, again, good illustrations of that. I mentioned the movement of people from public to semi-public to semi-private and private space. Whether you're consciously thinking or not, as you move here, there's almost this sense that, oh, I'm starting to get into private property, and it's happening very fast. It's almost as if you don't, it's an automatic thing. You recognize, by the time you get up here, you recognize that, wow, you know, this is a lot different than it was down here, where, you know, I can pretty much do as I please, but up here now I'm in somebody's turf. So this all helps in terms of the concept of territoriality. Newman talked about releasing people's latent sense of territoriality, and he said that defensible space, if you design a space defensively, which this is an illustration of, you will actually do that. And that's great, because that's when people kind of police their own properties, and they govern behavior, and also, again, this is perceptible to the offenders, so they keep their behavior presumably in check more so than in a place not designed so well. This includes things like maintenance and signage as well. Not necessarily the signage aspects, not necessarily something you expect to see on the residential scale, but it is something that's important on the commercial scale. So, what role did CPTED play in the city's success? Well, you know, there's lots of good examples out there, and I know that Wayne and certainly Randy are going to touch on some of them, but I just picked one which is kind of interesting to me. It was something I have to, you know, say I had nothing to do with. It was one of these things that I learned of after the fact, and we had people at the time with Peel Living, a very talented person by the name of Virginia Dabris, who had Virginia and the Peel Living people had consulted with the developers, because here we had two developments. We had Same builder, but different owners, different applicants. And one wanted to build to CPTED principles, the other did not. And so it's interesting because where else can you find, but I guess the city of Mississauga, two buildings where it's almost like a little bit of a lab experiment. You know, one, the CPTED building, the other not. And actually, I'll show you the site plan. Maybe you can tell me which one was built to CPTED principles. I'll just show you. This property is a little bit different than the neighboring property in that it's a corner. Just to give you some context, there's residential properties here. There's a retail plaza up here, if I can just illustrate it. It goes along the back end of this. There is a townhouse complex here. It wasn't built at the time this was constructed. And the main entrance to the corner property is right here. You come in here. Of course, these are about 9-story buildings, as is this. This building is somewhat just a mirror of the other in a sense, you know, in terms of the footprint of the building, but not really anything else. Because if you can notice, where's the main entrance on the second building? Back in the back. You come down this driveway, and the turnabout is right here. Now, this is actually the visitor parking for that building. It abuts that, the rear alley of that retail plaza. This is the visitor parking here, and to a smaller extent up here for the corner building. This leads to an underground ramp. This leads to your underground ramp here, a separate access point, and it also leads to the moving area. Just to show you where the recreational spaces play out, the recreational space, there's a couple on each. One's a tot lot. The tot lot is customarily closer to the building. It's located here on the corner building. This is another play area here. This is actually a basketball court up in this section. Now, over here you've got your tot lot and the older children's playground here. There is no basketball court on that second property. Anybody have an inkling as to which property was built to CPTED principles and which was not? Any instinct as to which might be a little bit more? Yeah?
The one on our right is CPTED.
So you're saying this one? You are correct. Why would you say that? I'm just curious.
Somebody driving by on the road could see a lot of the vehicles that are in the parking lot and see people coming and going out of the main entrance of the building. It has some place for youth to hang out, whereas the other one just has a place for children. And youth tend to get into mischief when they're bored. They're not bad people, but when they're bored, they look for something kind of funky. The idea of the back alley from the shopping mall being where there's a large parking lot that may not be well lit, I don't know, creates more of an opportunity for crime.
Yeah, excellent. In fact, I never like to see, this is essentially a semi-public area, right? Because this is where the visitors park, so it just, as a matter of fact extension, it's all semi-public. I never like to see semi-public space abutting publicly accessible space, particularly the rear alley of a plaza. Not to say that anything necessarily happens there, but there is always that potential. And really, would you want your children playing right up against the rear alley of a plaza? You know, is there a conflict there? Here, this is actually more interior to the site. This is more of a defensible space. And look, we're going to see this in pictures, but this ramp actually creates a nice buffer, if you will. And we'll see this here. I'll take you through this. Now, I've changed the perspective a little bit. I've turned this around. This is the corner property now, and this is the driveway entrance. So the driveway entrance is here. So that entrance is faced by all these windows. Here, by the way, is the retail, as you can see up here. But so the driveway is situated in a place that is married up with surveillance. And that's a good thing from a CPTED point of view. You want to have that relationship. Here is the building built without CPTED principles. You come in here. It's hard to even see somebody. We're taking this from the vantage point of the next door roof. But it's hard to even follow who comes in here. One person, the same happens here. They could see the person coming in, but they couldn't see where they went from there. And it was very curious. I actually took Tim Crow, the author of the Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design textbook, late Tim Crow here one day, and we were literally right about where this vehicle was. And we noticed a couple of guys walking through the property, and they drew our attention. And when they actually kept walking here and then hopped this fence. And he said to me, "Did you have to pay them to do that?" And I said, "No, pretty much the design. You know, if you think about the path of least resistance, and if somebody wanted to take a shortcut from the residential area here and get to the back of the retailer, are they going to go, what's the most porous sort of or easy route? It's straight through this, because this is all semi-public." Here's how it looks from the back. Now this is from the back alley, and then there's a driveway which leads to the front of the plaza. Here you can see this is actually the ramp area, and it creates a kind of a concrete canyon. Yet here, the only thing that separates you is this fence, which at that time was a 6-foot fence. Now it's a 9-foot fence, reinforced with landscaping, and a narrow weave chain link to keep people honest in terms of not going through here. But again, you can see very, very porous. Here, this is defensible space. You have to navigate yourself through really effectively an obstacle course. This was landscaped up so that the only way to get through it is through some landscaping, and you know, you're certainly not going to go over this unless you're some superhero or something. You've got a blue night costume on or something like that. But so you can see again how it plays out. Now we're just inside the fence. And here, you know, this is open. I mean, if this was a football field, you'd be scoring a touchdown. There's nothing here to stop you from getting to these residential area over here, which is the source of the trespass. Here, we're inside the property, but what do we see? A wrought iron fence. It serves for safety purposes so people don't fall in here, but this is the only way down through here. And again, this is much more defensible space. You don't get people trespassing through here when just next door you have that condition. The playgrounds, this is nestled in the tot lot into literally the bosom of the building. The eyes on, it's right opposite a laundry room. Here, not so much. You can see there's not really as much overlook. And look at this over in the corner. And by the way, this is the light standard for the neighboring plaza, the back alley. Look how tight, that's on the retail property. Look how close that is to the playground area here. And when I've gone back and checked this over time, you'll see the fence opened up in this corner. So, what are the crime stats? Unfortunately, I do have the 11 stats, and they're not on this one, and I apologize for that. But this is the building, obviously built to CPTED principles, and this is the one built without. Now, we've actually seen further progression. You know, these are a little reasonably higher, and this is just a little bit higher. There's even a greater distance between these two figures. It's hard to say that CPTED accounts for just that, because you know the predominant occurrence in a residential building like this of this scale would be domestic occurrences and things like that. But certainly, if you look at property-related crime, much lower in here than it is here. Suspicious vehicles, much lower here. So you know it's a pretty significant difference. So how did it become part of the city's culture? Well, back in 1991, the Peel Regional Police Services Board approved, basically as part of a strategic plan, to have a CPTED trained officer. I was lucky enough to be the guy through the door. You know, it sounded appealing to me, I must admit. But and I had heard of Oscar Newman prior to this, back in high school, the geography classes. But that's only because I was back. That was in Oscar Newman's day. So it was. So I got sent down to the University of Louisville and took a 5-day course, which pretty much is a bit ironic. I never thought I'd have the opportunity to say it, but I spent 5 years at this campus in the 70s, got a Bachelor of Commerce, and honestly, between the thing that had the greatest and most profound influence in my life, the 5-day course in Louisville, or the 5 years spent here, it's true. So anyway, I don't get to use my Bachelor of Commerce too often. But anyway, so that was then. We have a It's identified as one of 4 key components, and there's a position dedicated. It was supposed to be 2 years. So, you know, the math is, you think 21 years later. Anyway, so here we have a very young-looking me. Brian keeps on reminding me I should get a more lifelike picture. But anyway, the 2 officers are actually sent to University of Louisville. And I went into Crime Prevention Services, what is known as Crime Prevention Services, in 1992, January. So that was the first, in effect, if you think of it, for me at least, the first shoe to drop. Now there were others that were still doing CPTED, like Virginia Debris, and we have Councillor Pat Sato in the room. And you know, I'm not saying that there aren't others thinking CPTED, even doing it in their thinking back then. But it was, for me, it was the first shoe to drop. The next shoe, again, for me, was really getting the planners involved. And we had a meeting at police headquarters after I worked on this high school in Brampton, and we wanted to introduce CPTED to planning staff and a host of other people in the region. And we invited a whole group of people, and Wayne Nishihama was in that group of people. And I remember Wayne distinctly, actually, because as he walked out of that meeting, he was one of only a few people, I think he was actually the only one to stop. And he had a comment about something to do with the landscaping or something. And it was interesting because I could just tell, I'm not sure if this guy is necessarily buying everything at this point, or where he stands. But Wayne, it became known very soon. Wayne's a very, I think planners by profession are very kind of forward-thinking. They see the big picture. And I remember him telling me that, he thought about in terms of design or safety. And if it came down to aesthetics or safety, safety was going to win. So, Wayne, I think I've met planners that have not bought into this. I mean, a police officer with a 5-day course behind them? Come on, please. If a civilian walked in with 5 days of, police foundations course and started telling me how to run the police department, or the chief more likely, how to run the police department, I think they would be shown the door. So, at the end of the day, this was actually quite a leap of faith that Wayne was, willing to consider this. And then, of course, we have Councillor Pat Sato. This was, in effect, the other shoe to drop. And at least, again, this is from my perspective. Now, we're not going to be fair and have equal time and, rebuttal and things like this. But, and I'm sure Pat was doing things even as, unbeknownst to me. But this was where I think, to me, this sort of era, this sort of grouping was very fortunate type of footing and basis and forming of a partnership that we got off on the right foot. Whether it was by good luck, good fortune, good planning, who knows? But the key that I think has distinguished us from the very get-go, it was that we were firing on, in effect, the 3 main cylinders for what I say you need to have CPTED go. And without any one of these components, it's going to be a lot less successful. And in places where it has been less successful, it's because they're not firing on these 3 cylinders. Now, there's other community groups as well, but very important, say City of Mississauga, and et cetera. Now, they weren't around back then, but they come in on the fold as we go forward and the partnership grows. But from there we can tap into school boards, et cetera. Not everybody's represented there. But to speak of Pat's involvement, and really what this did significantly, we formed what was then known as the Appeal CPTED Committee. And the Appeal CPTED Committee involved all those partnerships I was talking about, the school boards, and on and on. It involved the City of Brampton because it's a regional committee, the town of CALA, et cetera. There were more elected officials, more police officers, more planners on it. We identified problems, we resolved those problems. There were a number of aspects to our mandate. And again, at a very early time. Now that couldn't have happened if it wasn't for somebody like Pat Sato advocating for this at regional council, speaking up in municipal council as well. You know, you got to remember it was 20 years ago, but it seemed to me, and again, you know, I'm not maybe the best person to say this, but it was more the exception than the rule that people were talking this 20 years ago. Pat was talking this 20 years ago. Now, it's more the rule than the exception. But, not to say people weren't safety conscious, but CPTED in particular, definitely more the exception than the rule. But Pat was right there. We then developed a course for Ontario Police College, 1996. We've held that course every year since. It was the first course in Ontario. And we trained the planners. So the planners actually, from the get-go, they start to get involved in bring the CPTED principles into play. That then took us to the Mississauga CPTED Advisory Committee, and we have the chair, who's been the chair for now 15 years of that committee, here, and he's our next speaker, Wayne Nishihama.
Tom's very passionate about CPTED. In fact, speaking after him, both Randy and I have a real task because he squeezed us for time. He could go all day. We got involved in CPTED in 1992 through Tom McKay, and we were an integral part of the Peel CPTED Committee. But the Peel CPTED Committee dealt with regional matters, and we felt that from a city standpoint that we needed to deal with local issues. And therefore we formed the Mississauga CPTED Committee. Now the Mississauga CPTED Committee consisted of Peel Police, Safe City Mississauga, and all of the departments in representatives from all the departments in the city of Mississauga. Our mandate basically was to create a safe city. Some of our objectives of the committee were to proactively plan and design safer city facilities and parks and open spaces, to look at the planning process and work with the development industry to create a safer and design safer communities, to address the needs of the staff, to implement CPTED concepts, and to have a forum where we could distribute and discuss CPTED information with the Peel Police, Safe City Mississauga, and the City of Mississauga. Randy's going to be talking about designing safe city facilities, parks, and buildings. I'm going to be speaking about how CPTED fits into creating a safe community. Basically, what I'm going to demonstrate is there's a correlation between good urban design and CPTED principles. To me, CPTED is basically just good design. And as Tom mentioned, we have to find this balance between aesthetics and safety. There's two ways of looking at CPTED. There's reactive and proactive. Reactive is to respond to a built situation and modify the conditions. From a planning aspect, this is where we come in. It's proactive CPTED, to plan and design safer communities before they're built. Now I'm going to use a couple examples. These are typical suburban houses built in the 1980s, maybe late 80s, and they're dominated by the garage. These were pointed out by Tom McKay that they're vulnerable to break-ins. Can anybody tell me why? You knew that. She's been on the course. Yes. Doors are hidden. And why is that? It's because the garage became more dominant. The lots got more and more narrower as we want, as developers want to maximize their land for development. So the one thing that they always have to provide in a single-family lot is 2 cars. So how do we combat that? From a planning perspective, if we have a clean slate, what we did is we created wider lots, we created more opportunities for porches, we put the garages on the side, you could actually put them in the back. So you could see, in this case, you could see the windows fronting onto the street, you see porches being added. Here's another example. It doesn't have to be a big house. It could be a smaller house, and it has the elements of good natural surveillance with windows and a front door that addresses the street. Here's another example. And if you look at this example, it was built in the 50s. So we're actually going back to the way we did things in the past. Front door, lots of visibility onto the street, and a garage on the side. The overall impact from a community standpoint is, when you look at this, this is the protruding garage concept. And if you add, this is during the daytime where there's no vehicles in the driveways, but if you add all the cars on the weekend on the driveways, because people don't use their garages, then can you see your neighbor? Can you come out your front door and see your neighbor? Can you see your kids play on the street? Can you see what's happening to your neighbor's property? Because the garage and the parked cars are going to be dominating your views. Now, if you look at another way of looking at it, this is the concept of having wider lots. You could have porches and a lot of visibility onto the street. From a marketing standpoint, which would you buy? From an aesthetic standpoint, which would you buy? This development here or into this development here? So it's a quiet way of we've changed the way we looked at things from a neighborhood standpoint. We were going more to this. Eyes on the street, more activity on the street. They have on-street parking, and so on. Now, I'm going to look at what's happened in the past. This is a subdivision which was built in the 70s. And again, we planned this. It's not just didn't happen. We made some errors, in this. As you can see, it was designed for the car. There was very little connectivity to each element. There's a school over here, the park is way in the back. And developer wanted to maximize land frontage, so he could get as many lots as possible. He actually tucked the park behind all the developments, so it's actually quite secluded. And how do you cross the street? They have a path going through a woodlot under the road to the school. That's the normal walk for a child to go to the school. So is that a safe environment? And we planned that. Again, in the 70s, we planned for the car. You know, we created these scenarios where we have a lot of rear frontages. You see a lot of the older neighborhoods with noise walls. And this is what it does to the street. Yet, the city does provide a sidewalk. Who in their right mind will feel safe along the sidewalk here? If there was an accident out here or anything that happens on the street, is there anybody that can help you? Is there any witnesses? There's none. It also, we designed where we had to drive to everything. All the cars had to be accommodated on the road and large parking lots. We also put our subdivisions in isolated areas, all grouped together. So basically, you could not walk to anything. You couldn't walk to your commercial store. You couldn't walk to your work. Now, I'm going to use an example that how CPTED worked. This is a development in Port Credit. It's the old starch plant. The brownfield situation. It was being torn down. It was sold to developer for development. This is the original proposal that they came in with. And it had a series of large towers, condo towers fronting onto the waterfront. They wanted to basically privatize the waterfront because it's a good selling point to have waterfront property. They also had a road to accommodate the apartments. So it looked like really a gated community. This is what we came up with. This is what is built right now. Public park. Well, the key thing that we fought very hard for is this public road, waterfront road. So now we fronted development on the road which faces the park. So you have eyes on the park. You have a road that faces the park. You have access for police and ambulances to the park. The development that you saw that Tom showed, the townhouse projects where he described the front porches and so on, this is the development right here. Now, for this community here, residential community, they could walk to everything. You see different lands, you see townhouses here, you see commercial areas up in here, you have offices in here, so you could actually work in the community. You have apartments in this location, so there's a variety of different types of housing, and you have live-work units up in here. And from an aesthetic standpoint, this fits right into the community. It blends right into the community. The community has actually embraced this development. It's won a number of awards. It's well designed. Again, even in the public square, you have eyes on the square. You have a restaurant, you have a lot of activity around the public square. These are live-work units where the front is retail, above is residential. On the back side, instead of having an alleyway, is actually the front doors of the units to the development. So they walk in, the bottom floor is still residential, they walk up through the unit up to their residential unit. Now, how do we plan this? And this is a development in Port Credit, and as you can see, how do we transform this into what we're looking at into a good CPTED? So how we're looking at it is trying to create more eyes on the street, creating more activity on the street. Through this, we've created and planned for retail on the bottom, residential on top, and more eyes onto the street. Again, this is typical of many communities which were built around the 70s and 60s. How does it transform into a real village character? Again, we have to plan for this. We have to plan the right type of use that we want on the street. We want to make sure that we have a real mix. We want to make sure that there's a lot of activity and eyes on the street. Basically, with the planning department, we have 13 designers and about 20 planners on staff. Each one of the planners and designers have taken CPTED course, and they're trained in CPTED. What we do is part of our thinking. We don't look at it in isolation. We look at it as part of our thinking. Anytime we look at a development application, we think safety is as part of our mandate.
Thank you very much, Wayne. I'm going to run through quite quickly a number of slides associated with a bunch of the facilities that we've redeveloped over the last 10, 15 years. Now, picking up on both what Tom and Wayne have said, all of these facilities that we're going to see here have all been proactively looked at in terms of CPTED principles. And I think we've done a pretty good job in terms of retrofitting a number of them and building some of the new ones. This is one of our newest parks. It's down on the lakefront. It's Lakeside Park. It's over on the western part of Mississauga. it's in an industrial area. And what's important about this particular park and the way that we laid it out is we put most of the major facilities up within viewing distance of the road that goes across here. There's a lot of trucks that go through here, like all times during the day and in the evening. And so all the facilities that we have, the public facilities, are fairly close, and there's lots of eyes on this park, even though it's in a very remote location within the city itself. We have a dog off-leash area here, which is an enclosed space. This gets tons of use. It gets used all the time, which is a great facility for a park like this, which is, again, in a very remote location. The center part is a big spray pad that brings people into the city, or into the park, makes it active. On the south end, we have the waterfront trail passing through. So we have a lot of activity going through, both on the north side and on the south side of this park, and taking part in the facilities that happen here. The parking, of course, is up near the road. Again, we utilized high-mast canopy trees, so you have a view from the road under the trees, and the shrubs are kept to a minimum, a lower level, so you can see over top of them. And that's a standard practice that we use, and you're going to see that in a number of the slides that I have. This is Iceland 4-pad arena facility on Matheson Road, and what's important here is a number of the facilities. This is the 4-pad arena. We have our major skateboard park located in this area here. We also have soccer fields to the south, and a playground and a spray pad in this location as well. But what we've done here is, when we were laying this out, we wanted to make sure that, again, it's kind of a remote area, it's a bit of an industrial area. We want to make sure that police and emergency vehicles, first of all, they have an address where they can find the facility if a call goes out, and that they have a full, the ability to go all the way around the site to go to whatever part of the site that they're needed. And this is really important when we laid out the skateboard park, because the skateboard park, when we built this, I think it was built in 2003, when we were doing our research, we wanted to put it as far away from the residents as possible because they generate a lot of noise. And we wanted to put our major facility, in fact, all our smaller satellite facilities are all associated with community buildings, community centers, because there is a tendency for skateboarders to get hurt. And if they get hurt, it's best if they have access to people who can help them, but also a phone if there's a real emergency. And in this location, they have access. Police also have access through this area here, and then of course there's the sight lines from the road as well. This is a recent redevelopment of Memorial Park in Port Credit, and again, we made a very active design in terms of where we located facilities. Again, I'm going to point out the skateboard park up here, and one of the reasons we put it in this location was, again, it was very close to the existing community center and arena, but also because the arena itself blocked noise from traveling through to the residential areas a little bit to the east, and there's railway tracks on the north side, so that wasn't so much of an issue. But all the facilities are laid out based on CPTED principles of natural surveillance, territorial reinforcement, and here's a facility a number of years later. So this is the park that was actually built, and just in the last couple of years, the arena itself was redesigned. So we were also brought in, the project was brought forward to the CPTED committee for review of the actual layout of the building and its design. So this is the previous facility, and what's important to show here is these are doorways into the previous washrooms, which was problematic in terms of sight lines. There's no sight lines, of course. There's no monitoring available because the facilities are actually on the outside of the building, so it's a significant setback from the rest of the park. And you have these wing walls, which kind of hide people who are going in and out. This was the design that was brought forward to the committee. As you can see, there's a tremendous amount of glass. So this is the part looking west towards the park and the river. Lots of natural surveillance opportunities. There's a sense of ownership of the park just from the building itself. And the washrooms, I believe, were put inside of the building, so they're actually protected. and monitored. This was the artist's rendering of the view from that area, looking out into the park, to the river, and providing the overlook. This is the finished facility. It opened about 1.5 years ago. So you get a sense, this is the area that we're just kind of inside in terms of the artist's rendering. That's it at night. This is a smaller community level park called McKay Park. And the building here is a washroom building. There's a spray pad to the side, and then there's playgrounds associated with this, and there's also a number of 2 ball fields, and I think 2 soccer fields. So again, I'm standing on the sidewalk, or on the road actually. And so you have clear sight lines into the front of the building, into the front entrance to the 2 washroom areas. The spray pad is off to the side. You use, again, high mast canopy trees, so you see underneath them, and low shrubs. And again, the building is sited in kind of the center of the park, so there's always people passing through. So again, lots of activity, lots of eyes on. This was a major redevelopment we did at Mississauga Valley Community Center. So this was a photo from probably 1995-96. So when the committee first got going, we did audits on all the major facilities in the city. And as you can see, there's a number of issues with this facility. The front entrance, or the main entrance to the building, is actually 1 floor below. So there's a whole series of steps here that you don't see until you're there. But as you can imagine, going to pick up your child after they've been in some sort of facility program at night, you're probably telling them, wait inside the building until I get there. Well, you can't even tell where they are, whether they're there or not. And also the wing wall for the handicap access ramp, there's a hiding spot. So we made recommendations completely on this whole facility, both inside and out. I've got a few more slides that are going to show you how we modified the outside, but we have another presentation that shows you the whole complex. And there was a series of very severe incidents that happened inside this building as well, where people, people broke in and they did, I think it was $125,000 worth of damage in a number of hours. It was pretty significant. So this is what it looks like today. So we've taken out the handicap access ramp from here. We brought the entrance up to the top level. So now if you enter the building, you enter actually into the space, and then you go down the steps into the facility. What you don't see from here, but down the steps, is actually the main information desk, which has clear visual access up to this point. We didn't have that in the past. So now we have eyes on not only from the outside of the building, but we have it from the inside of the building as well. We also consolidated another entranceway. This was a separate entrance up into the library. So that was the entrance into the community center, and this is to the library. And again, both of them had issues in terms of, people hiding, but also you get people coming into the building, into the library, and not being seen by anybody because there was no central access point. So we rectified all of that by basically creating one entrance point for the whole facility. We also made a number of other changes, making it far safer, not just in terms of CPTED safety, but in terms of pedestrian safety by modifying how you actually entered the building from the parking lot. This was I think after the first CPTED audit. There was 2. We did one in 1995 and we did a follow-up in 2001 when we knew the building was going to be renovated, completely renovated. And so this was part of the first audit where the pine trees out in front here were all limbed up, so now you had some sort of a bit more visual access. Because one of the biggest problems in this facility is a lot of the programs, of course, run until about 10 o'clock at night. Well, staff are actually leaving even later. They're leaving at around 11 o'clock after they've cleaned up. And walking from the building out into a parking lot that's hidden is problematic and causes a bit of a concern. This is around the back of the facility. So again, we limbed up trees, removed some trees, removed some shrubs. Again, increasing the sight lines, increasing your ability to perceive what's going on around you as you come into these spaces. This was another facility that was redone in, I think, 2003. This is Malton Community Center. And again, these initial slides are from, I think, 1995. This area here, this is around the back of the building. And there was a huge, at one time it was a beautiful garden, but over time, the beautiful garden got taken over by activities that shouldn't happen in beautiful gardens. So this huge shrub bed here, those shrubs were 4, 5, 6 feet high, and there's huge numbers of them. So we were actually finding people were going in and actually hiding within there, smoking cigarettes, doing all sorts of stuff. And so that was part of the original. Oh, I should go back here and just point something else at. And also, on the back of the building originally, there was a trellis structure that provided shade, much needed shade to that area. But the problem was, it allowed access up into the roof of the building. And so it was constantly, kids climbing up to the top of the building. So we identified all of this in the first audit. And when they came to redoing the building, again, we reviewed all the plans going through the CPTED committee and made recommendations both inside the building and also on the outside. So this is the modified landscape on the outside. This was the back entrance to the building. So there were 2 entrances. There's an entrance on the front and an entrance on the back that allows the community to actually flow through. We incorporated the same principle of having the main information desk right in the center it actually juts out into the space so you can see people coming and going into the building. The building was just actually added onto again this year, so there's a new pool on the outside. Huge bank of windows which overlook the park, so again, lots of eyes on. Parents sitting there watching the children swim will also have a view out into the park and a view over the spray pad, playgrounds, everything else. That's what it looks like today. And then this is the last series of slides. This is a new facility in one of our downtown parks. It's called Community Common, and this is a public washroom building. It's unique in a lot of ways. When the original design, I have 1 minute left, so I'm going to have to go really quick. But essentially what we did, washrooms are problematic, as we all know, in terms of what can go on in them. And thinking of putting ourselves in the position of being a parent with a smaller child of the opposite sex, it's always an issue in terms of which washroom did they go into. So as we were coming up with the concept of this building, we thought, how are we going to address this, and how do we make a washroom safer? And a number of us challenged contemporary washroom design, our kind of typical brick building. Basically saying, in provincial parks, all you have is a couple of stalls, and then you wash your hands outside that. Why can't we start to think in terms of different ways? So what we actually came up with was a building with a lot of glass. And the glass is translucent, so that you have, this is it during construction. This is the text that we use on the glass, so it relates to the design of both this facility and also Celebration Square. It's based on the city's motto, Pride in Our Past, Faith in Our Future. But we use this as a text to bring some opacity to the glass, which is a translucent glass. But this is from the inside. And that's what the glass looks like. Okay, so here we have Tom. He's standing on the inside of this building. So he's in the public part of the washroom, which is the washing of your hands area. The stalls, of course, are actually in the area that are much more secluded. But what it does show is that me standing on the outside, I'm able to see someone on the inside and what's going on. So it brings a level of safety to this washroom. And I'm now on the inside of the washroom looking at, so again, you get this, situation where if you're intent on doing something that's not good, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to be seen. So anyway, I'm sorry I had to fly through that, but there it is. If there's any questions,